All right, in this lesson, we'll explore yet another way to extract values from a series, and that's using the get method. So I'll begin by re-executing the code from the previous lesson, and I'm going to preview the first 3 rows of our Pokemon series. We can see we have the Pokemon name as the index labels and the type of the Pokemon as the values. Now there's one additional line of code that I want to add here in between here. And this is something that's not going to be particularly noticeable when we're dealing with small series like 750 rows here, which is nothing for pandas. But when you start dealing with larger data sets and you start extracting values based on index position, it really helps to have the index sorted. And that helps pandas in its back-end algorithm locate the value that you're seeking much quicker. So what I'm actually going to do after importing is call my sortIndex method. And remember, by itself, that's going to modify our series, then throw it out the window. So in order to actually overwrite Pokemon, I have to use that in-place parameter and set it equal to true. Now when I execute the cell, you'll see that we're starting with the Pokemon that start with A, which is alphabetical, which is the start of the alphabet. So we're all good. And when we use methods, even basic extractions like we introduced in the previous lessons, the operation will perform faster on the back end. So let's talk a little bit about the get method. It works very similar to how our regular brackets work. It's just the way that we can call a method. So if we do get, and always include the parentheses because it is a method, we can see that the very first argument that we have to provide is for the key parameter, and that represents 1 or more index labels. So if I do something like Moltres, it's going to do the exact same thing as if we used the square brackets. If I want to do a list, all I have to do is provide a list to that key parameter. So I can do Moltres Meowth, for example. Those are 2 Pokemon, and there we have that. And in fact, I can also write the parameter name out explicitly if you want. That's up to you. There it goes. So there's going to be an interesting result when we do get with a value that does not exist. So for example, if we do Pokemon.get and we do a key of Digimon, which does not exist, it's going to appear to give us nothing. And the reason is because unlike the standard bracket method, which returns an error, and we can see that right here, in comparison to the regular bracket syntax, which returns an error, the get method rather, has a parameter called default, and whenever it's unable to find that index label in our series, it's going to return that default value to us. And the default argument to that default parameter is null or nothing. And we can replace it with our own custom value to return whenever Pandas is unable to find what we're looking for. So for example, if I give the default parameter here a value of this is not a Pokemon, anytime we give it a key that doesn't exist in our series index, it's going to tell us this is not a Pokemon. We can see that up here. I'm going to delete this cell below, by the way. And anytime we give it a key that does exist, such as Charizard, it's going to give us the actual value there. So we have fire as the type of Charizard. And what's interesting here is this goes completely out the window whenever we introduce lists. So if I do something like Charizard and Digimon, one of those exists, one of those doesn't. And let's say I want to set default to this is not a Pokemon again. Unfortunately, when I execute this, it's going to go back to the standard operation, which is whenever it locates the value, it's going to give us the correct, or rather, whenever it locates the index label, it's going to give us the corresponding value. But whenever it does not find an index label, it's going to give us back that NaN, which stands for null or missing. It's going to ignore whatever argument we give to default. I'm curious what happens if both of them don't exist. If I do something like Blahmon. In that case, it's also just going to return a series with only null values. So it looks like this default parameter goes out the window when we're dealing with a list argument for our key parameter. But otherwise, if we do anything that doesn't exist, it's going to resort to the default, which is this is not a Pokemon. So it is a little bit more of a flexible method that allows you to play around with what gets returned and avoid errors. But it's really the same thing as the bracket syntax. You're welcome to use whichever one you'd like. as you proceed through your normal data work.